kind of down towards the end of chapter 7, as I have it. I think I wrote that down right. I may have written it down wrong. But just to kind of give a little bit of review of where the children, we're going to call them the children of Israel, also going to call them maybe the exiles. These are the people that are returning from Babylon back to Jerusalem. And so they've gathered together there on the shore on the bank of a river, probably in a big flat area to kind of, as we talked about earlier, getting all our supplies, getting everybody ready, getting ready to head out. They're loading up to go. And we talked about how, the Babylonians had, through God, had, blessed them by giving them a lot of provisions for their travel, for their sacrifices, and a lot of gold. And we talked about the amount of gold being about 30 tons of gold. I didn't do the math on that. I don't even know the weights. I had read that in one of the books that I read. And so this is a considerable amount of worth of gold that they're taking with them. They're also taking, it seems to me like they're taking some of the holy utensils. Like I said, I don't know if I fully understand or if we're even meant to know the full logistics of, because remember Nebuchadnezzar had taken all the gold bowls and the censers. Did the originals, when they went back, did they take some of that back with them too? Maybe some of it, but I don't know if they had a good place to keep it because they were going back to a place that was in ruins. And so now maybe they're taking more of it, and this king is, fulfilling the decree that Darius had made. So anyway, they're taking all this stuff back so that they can reestablish the worship there in the temple in Jerusalem. And so great responsibility involved in this. You got a large number of people. You've got all these valuable objects. I think that as we're going to read here, that Ezra is going to be very diligent in accounting for those objects. Both when they leave, they're going to get them together, they're going to weigh them, they take inventory of them. They're going to travel across the desert, being protected by God without, an army from the Babylonians or from the Persians. And we talked earlier how, it would be pretty, tempting for I don't know what they call them in those days, a raider or, somebody to come in and try to steal some of that, right? And so we see that they put their faith in God and they travel, but they're also diligent among themselves to, whenever they're going to get back, they're going to recount it and reweigh it out. Why do you think they did that? Did they not trust the other exiles?
It verifies their faithfulness.
All right. I think for one thing, it verifies their faithfulness both to God, and also they probably want to verify their diligence to the king as well, too, right? Because if you've entrusted somebody with this much, we're going to call it money, valuables, you want to see that it's getting to where it's supposed to be, right? And so whenever I think something we can take from that, whenever we are involved in really anything, verifying that, and keeping track of these things is not something where you're trying to catch somebody necessarily, but you're just showing that faithfulness, I think. And also that's going to remove any temptation, right? Because we know that the Israelites and everybody throughout history has been tempted to take something that wasn't theirs. Remember when the children of Israel were coming and they raided some towns and stuff, and they were coming out of the wilderness, and God said, destroy everything. And some of them brought back some stuff and hid it under their tent. And so we see the great plague that caused. Maybe Ezra was familiar with that. I'm sure he was. And he's like, I don't want that to happen to us. And so he was faithful in keeping track of these possessions and making sure that they all got to where they were supposed to be. And that's kind of where we it's kind of where we are, I think, in chapter 7. I think maybe it's chapter 8. Maybe I said the wrong. Yeah, it's chapter 8. I'm sorry. So I got us down through about 33. It says, and on the fourth day, the silver and the gold utensils were weighed out in the house of our God into the hand of Mermath, the son of Uriah, the priest. With him was Eleazar, the son of Phinehas, and with them were the Levites, Josad, son of Jeshua, Noadad, the son of Benemiah. Everything was numbered and weighed, and all the weight was recorded at that time. The exiles who had come from the captivity offered burnt offerings to the God of Israel, bulls for all of Israel, 177 lambs, 12 male goats for a sin offering as a burnt offering to the Lord. Then they delivered the king's edict to the king's satraps and the governors and the provinces beyond the river, and they supported the people in the house of God. So they get back. This is a sad day, right? No, this is a very happy day. They're overjoyed. They're back to Jerusalem. It may not be a developed city yet. The temple, all these things are probably not what they were. They aren't what they were whenever the Babylonians came and carried them off. But they're back. They offer these sin offerings for their sin. What was their sin? Not individually, but their sin was they had, as a nation, they had sinned against God, worshipped idols, forsaken him. And so maybe they're coming back offering the sin offering for that. And then they give this king's edict to all the governors and the people in the area and the region. And it says they followed it. Remember what that edict was? That they were supposed to, the people that were living around them were supposed to support them. And so they see that these nations, that this happened. And this probably happened because, for one, because the hand of God was in it, but also because it was, required of them by the king. I think that is the end of chapter 8. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts on any of that on chapter 8? Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of detail and it's kind of like historical recording of these things, facts. And now they've got these things weighed and counted and they put them into the temple. They know how many they've got from now on, right? They shouldn't have this is what we should have. Yeah. Okay, so as Brett reminds us how that when Belteshazzar had the feast and he called and they were using them, drinking out of them. And so, they had these things there and they were using them clearly in a manner that they weren't intent, and it was insulting to God, and he punished Belteshazzar for that. Yeah, thank you for that comment. Any other thoughts or comments? All right, now that Ezra he's gone through a lot of trouble, right? Walked back to Jerusalem with this great, number of people, and they get there and everything is going to be great, right? He gets there and finds out everything is A-okay. So let's read chapter 9 and see if that's actually the case. Now, when these things had been completed, the princes approached me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the people of the lands according to their abominations. Those are the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has intermingled with the peoples of the land. Indeed, the hands of the princes and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness. And when I heard about this matter, I tore my garment, my robe, and pulled some of my hair from my head and my beard, and sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel on account of the unfaithfulness of the exiles gathered to me, and I sat appalled until the evening offering. So here we see they get back. They've had this great ceremony. It's been very joyous. They've dedicated all these things to the worship. And Ezra gets the good news, right? Isn't that the way it is sometimes in our lives? Once you sit down, we're there, right? They were there. They were in Jerusalem. They'd made it back from Babylonian captivity. Something always comes along, not necessarily always, but something did come along for Ezra, right? And what happens whenever that happens to us? What do you want to do? Let's just take it. Just take it to your job. You get everything worked out, and all of a sudden something comes along, and the XYZ machine, the bearing goes out of it, catches on fire. There you are. You just want to throw your hands up. Right? You ever had that feeling? I just want to quit and go home. Has nobody else ever felt that way? I think I feel that way about 3 times a day sometimes. But this is more important than work. Ezra's made it to Jerusalem. They're going to set up the worship. And immediately when he gets there, they come to him and they tell him that few of the people have married some of the people from the foreign land, right? Is that what he said? He didn't say a few of the people. What kind of people was it? Huh? The leaders, the priests, the Levites. They have gone and they've intermarried with all these people, the Canaanites, I'm not going to read through the whole list again. Y'all remember the names of those people? You ever heard those names before? I'm over here looking at chapter 10 for some reason. The Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites. Where were those people supposed to be? What was supposed to have happened to those people? They were supposed to be gone, right? Because of their iniquity, God had told the children of Israel when they first got to Canaan back with Joshua a long time ago that they were supposed to run those people out of the land. We see they're still there. And so we see they're there. And not just the regular people, the people that would be uneducated in God's law, but the leaders, the least, the prayer have intermarried with these people. Do y'all remember why they got carried into captivity the first time? Idolatry, right? And that was brought on because they had intermarried with these people. Now, it talks in here about, the race, is this saying that God's a racist and the supreme biological race is Jewish? That's not the idea here. And even in today's society, it's not that, because if that's the case, we would all be cast out, right? But I don't know if anybody here has any Jewish, or descendants of Jewish, but that's all been done away with. So this is not a matter of race. It has nothing to do with the DNA of the Canaanite people or the Jebusites. It has to do with their religion and what they believed. You know what some of the main points of their religion were? One of the ways they worshiped was through prostitution. All right, now think about comparing that to how God has commanded his people to live. Pure, chaste, married to one woman. It's completely the opposite, right? You can't participate in both of those things. You just can't. It's impossible. You can't be in the pool and out of the pool at the same time. And so you can't do that. Do you remember what another one of their main parts of their religion was? Exactly. Exactly. So here we have another part of their worship is infant sacrifice, the taking of the life of an innocent child. And this is pretty well documented in history, because whenever they go back there and do excavation, they dig up like urns of infant skeletons and stuff that they have sacrificed. And, I don't know what possessed somebody to start doing that, but does that, you see how that stands completely opposite to what God stands for? Because God stands for love your neighbor as yourself, not human sacrifice. Those things are completely opposite as well. And so we see that is going to, that type of thing would draw the people away from worshiping God. All right, so here we see that they've gone back, they've taken some of their wives for themselves and some of their daughters, and that the princes have done it, the rulers have done it. And one of the things that I want to talk about, I guess I should talk about this earlier, but there was a way for somebody, because we're talking about the race thing, so somebody that's not a born Jew or Israelite, as I believe, how could they become part of Israel? They could. In the Old Testament, there was a method for somebody to become what they call a proselyte. And there are examples of people that were not descended from Abraham, who were faithful to God and worshiped him. I think one of the people we can look at is Ruth. We see that she was not an Israelite by blood, but she was in God's family because of her faithfulness to God. Also, I think you can turn back and look at Uriah the Hittite. He was a Hittite, but it talks about him, being part of Israel and being faithful to God. So it has nothing to do with, I guess the point we're making is biological race, but who you're faithful to and what you're faithful to. So when Ezra hears this, he's ready to, throw up his hands and quit. What does he do? He sits down on the ground, pulls his hair out, and pulls some of the hair out of his beard. I need somebody just to show me what it looks like to pull your hair out. I don't see any hands going up. Nobody's volunteering. Have you ever had somebody, that's not something that's like, we've all felt that way though, right? I just want to pull my hair out. But here we see he physically sits down and does this. And I think it's as much as his frustration, and also it's an outward sign to everybody that's there. Because if somebody does something like that, first of all, we're going to kind of take notice, right? And Ezra wasn't some, there are people, in society that have problems fitting in, or adjusting, and they have mental diseases. This wasn't somebody like that. This was Ezra. This would be like, our leader, whoever that is, just say the governor, sits down on Frankfurt and pulls his hair out and pulls his beard out. That's something that people are going to look at and take notes. Why is he doing that, right? Why is Ezra sitting here on the ground, pulling out his hair and his beard? We should be happy we're back, right? And so we see, I think this is a sign so that the people can recognize how serious a matter this is. And we see here in verse 4, then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel on account of the unfaithfulness of the exiles gathered to me, and I sat appalled until the evening sacrifice. And so once he does that, everybody that fears God came to him. Because I'm going to say that the people there knew clearly that what was going on was wrong, because they came and told Ezra, for one thing. You know, what do? We got this problem. And now we see that Ezra reacting. And so we see that they all are going to come together to listen to his voice. And in verse 5, but in the evening, at the evening offer, I arose, this is Ezra speaking, from my humiliation, even with my garment and my robe torn, and fell on my knees and stretched out my hands to the Lord my God. Ezra's in this situation. He doesn't know what to do. What does he do? He prays to God, right? Because he knows that, first of all, that they're guilty. He's praying to God maybe for some guidance, God to have mercy on them, to help them. He's appealing to God. That's the right thing. That's the right thing for him to do, is to appeal to God. Any thoughts or comments on this question, on this section before we proceed? All right, let's go ahead and read. Let's read verses 6 through 10. And I said, oh my God, I am ashamed and embarrassed to lift up my face to thee. My God, for our iniquities have risen above our heads, and our guilt has grown even to the heavens. Since the days of our fathers, we have been in great guilt, and on account of our iniquities, we, our kings, our priests, have been given to the hand of the kings of the lands, to the sword of captivity, to plunder, and to open shame, as it is to this day. But now, for a brief moment, grace has been shown from the Lord our God to leave an escaped remnant, to give us a peg in this holy place, that our God may enlighten our eyes and grant us a little reviving in our bondage. For we are slaves, yet in our bondage our God has not forsaken us, has extended loving kindness to us in the sight of the kings of Persia, to give us reviving, to raise up the house of God, to restore its ruins, and to give us a wall in Judah and Jerusalem. And now, our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments. I want to go back and look at verse 6. He says, I'm ashamed and embarrassed for our iniquities have risen above our heads. Had Ezra married somebody he had all the people? They hadn't, had they? But why do you think he includes the word our? All right, he's a part of the nation. This was a promise given to the nation of people, and he is there to be their leader. And so he includes himself in that. Can you all think of any other leader of the children of Israel that included themselves and was in the guilt? Did Moses? Remember, he included himself in the guilt back in Exodus. Whenever the children sinned, he included himself in that and was even willing to take some of the punishment, right? And so we see Ezra includes himself in his guilt. Another thing we can pretty well say is Ezra wasn't perfect either, right? He had sinned too. And so I think he includes himself in that guilt. And I think this phrase he uses is interesting. Guilt higher than our heads has risen up to heaven. What does that imply to you? If I tell you to go do a job and you say that job is over my head, what does that mean? I'm sorry? I can't do what you're asking me to do. If you come to me and ask me to design a rocket, I promise you, I do not know how to design a rocket. That job is over my head. It would be impossible for me to go out here and design a rocket. Now, I could maybe go and study and learn how to build a rocket. But this idea that their guilt, there was nothing that they could do to make their guilt go away, I think. It was above their capability. And then it says it had risen all the way up to heaven. I think the idea that it is not just this much over our heads, but all the way to heaven. And so, as you can see, how this Ezra has taken this very seriously, right? Yeah.
My family, there's a problem he sees here. Others have not seen it, perhaps, but he sees it, he identifies it, and instead of abandoning them, say, well, I can't be part of that. You know, instead of leaving them, he says, we need to take care of this. We need to deal with this together. We need to acknowledge it together. We need to repent of it. We need to pray together. We need to deal with it. He doesn't abandon them. He doesn't leave them high and dry. He stays with them and helps them work through the problem. And that's the right response.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And it's not that the other people previous to Ezra getting there didn't know it was a problem. And maybe they didn't have the authority to act on it. I'm sure it's been discussed, right? You think this has been brought up before? We don't have any record of it, but if they're coming to Ezra, if there's some people that want to be faithful and they're coming there and say, hey, we got a problem, more than likely they've brought it up before and been ignored. Maybe they didn't have the political power. Maybe they didn't have the guts to try to do something about it. And so, like it says, the response that Ezra, you know, what would some people have done if they've been Ezra? Y'all are crazy. I'm going back, right? I am out of here. Y'all have got yourselves into this mess. Get yourselves out of it. I'm going back to Babylon. And so we see that's not his response. And by him not having that response, what ultimately is going to happen? Israel's going to repent, right? I mean, if he'd have just went back, they'd have continued what they were doing, probably, and there would have been no repentance. But his willingness to stay there and fight for it ultimately ends up with their repentance. And in verse 7 here, I think he kind of recounts publicly, you know, Israel's past and their sins and how all their things they're doing now has already caused all the military defeat they had, the captivity, the torture, the sheer misery that it most definitely was to have been an Israelite that was, you know, attacked and carried off into captivity, went through famines and all that. And then at the end of that, in verse 8, he says, but now for a brief moment. Think about that. For a brief moment, grace has been shown from us. Did they deserve to get to come back to Jerusalem? They didn't deserve that. It was only by God's grace that was going to be allowed to happen. And he recognizes that and talks about how they had, you know, he left this remnant to escape, that God may enlighten our eyes, to grant us a little reviving in our bondage. when he talks about verse 9, how we were slaves in our bondage. They were still under control ultimately by the Persian government, right? Yeah, the Persian government was blessing them. So they weren't even completely out of bondage. God still had them under the Persian government, right? And so we see they're not even, and then they said God had given us grace, and he had built this wall around them. He had caused the Persian government to find favor with them. And then in verse 10, it says, now what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments. What are they going to say for themselves? What's their argument? They don't have one, right? They don't have a leg to stand on, that everything they're doing is wrong. And just kind of compare, I think it's an easy comparison to make that to our lives, right? And our relationship with Christ. Everybody's at some point forsaken God, sinned. But for a brief moment, God, he gives us this grace. We can't, it's like, what can we say? If I was going to go stand before God by myself, what would be the argument that I could make? Well, what could be the argument that you could make? I deserve to enter because that's to stop right there, doesn't it? None of us can make that argument. It's only through God's grace and through his Son that we can even enter. And so it's easy for us to look at that. Let's look at that and compare that to our lives and make us want to be more faithful. Make us not be like these children of Israel who married these foreign wives and gave their daughters to these men. And why do you think they did that? You think the girls were cute? You think maybe they went back to a land that there wasn't a whole lot there, and the people living there had some developed cities, maybe a neighborhood, a house already built, already nice developed flock of sheep? I don't know. They weren't putting their faith in God. They were putting their faith in those people. Just a thought. Any thoughts or questions on 6 through 10?
Especially freedom from sin is by God's grace. It's not by grace you save from faith, now that's earned. By grace you save. So whatever the power of the our life will be, whatever good happens, it is by the grace of God. It's a brief moment.
Yeah, it's a brief moment. It's not that we can earn it, but once we've been saved, we got to be faithful to it, right? Because they had been returned. They weren't faithful. If they had continued down this path, they were carried away again. But it's not that we're earning it. It's because of God's grace and his love that we're going to be faithful to him. Good thoughts. All right, let's look at 11. Let's do 11 through the end of the chapter. All right, so I kind of broke us off there at a comma, I guess, which seems like they're all commas. And now I'll go back to verse 10, that way it's a whole sentence. And now, our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken thy commandments, which thou hast commanded by the servants, the prophets, saying, the land which you are entering to possess is an unclean land with uncleanness of the peoples of the land with their abominations, which they have filled it from end to end with their impurity. So now do not give your daughters to their sons, nor take their daughters to your sons, and never seek their peace or their prosperity, that you may be strong and eat the good things of the land and leave it as an inheritance to your sons forever. And after all that has come upon us for our evil deeds and our great guilt, since thou, our God, has requited us less than our iniquities deserve, and has given us an escaped remnant as this, Shall we again break thy commandments and intermarry with the people who commit these abominations? Wouldst thou be angry with us to the point of destruction until there is no remnant, nor any who escape? O Lord God of Israel, thou art righteous, for we have been left an escaped remnant as it is to this day. Behold, we are before thee in our guilt, for no one can stand before thee because of this. So here in verse 11 through 12, this section is kind of a composite of quotations or ideas that are given all throughout the law. So we can go look at like Deuteronomy 4 and 5, Lamentations 1:17. I'm not going to, because of time, I'm not going to read all these, but you all recognize this terminology. Several passages. I mean, there's a whole lot of passages we could turn to in this section and see the parallel of the law. I mean, we all remember, it says, the land which you're entering to possess is an unclean land. The people are they fill with abominations. We all remember that wording from whenever the children of Israel were entering the land. And some of those things are the land was a polluted land. It doesn't mean that they had toxic waste. It means that it was full of sin. It was filled with abominations from one end to the other. It's kind of like there was not any good to be found in the land. Don't give your daughters to them. Don't seek their peace or their welfare. You were to not do all this so that you could be strong, because God was going to be the one that made you strong, and you would be able to eat the good things of the land and live forever. And then in verse 13, he talks about God had already been gracious and punished them less than they deserved. And he'd even allowed them to return. This remnant had escaped. Then he talks about in verse 14, it says, wouldst thou be angry with us to the point of destruction until there is no remnant or any who escape? I think he recognizes if we keep down this path, is there going to come a point in time where you destroy us all and there's nobody left to return? And then in verse 15, he talks about God being righteous. And then he talks about how that no one can stand before God because of this. And that's a statement that we've already talked about, that idea that no one, we're not going to be able to stand before God because of our sin. And that should cause us to want to do the same thing whenever we have sin in our life. What are we supposed to do? If Ezra had made his proclamation and all the people who had married their former wives says, you know what, you're right, we sinned. We asked for forgiveness, but I got to get back home to my Hittite wife because she's got supper ready. What would have been the result? That's been pointless, right? They were called to repent, and we're going to see that in chapter 10 that they're going to have to put those wives away. They're going to divorce them and leave them. And so we see that repentance is going to be required. I think that's the end of chapter 9. Any thoughts or comments? All right, so now we're going to get here to chapter 10, and this is the last chapter of Ezra here. So let's look at verses 1 through 4. Now, while Ezra was praying and making confession, weeping and prostrating himself before the house of God, a very large assembly, men, women, and children gathered to him from Israel, for the people wept bitterly. And Shechaniah, the son of Jehiel, one of the sons of Elam, answered and said to Ezra, we have been unfaithful to our God and have married foreign women from the peoples of the land, yet now there is hope for Israel in spite of this. So now let us make a covenant with our God to put away all the wives and their children according to the counsel of my Lord and of those who tremble at the commandment of our God, and let it be done according to the law. Arise, for this matter is your responsibility, but we will be with you Be courageous and act. So here we see this. This is I think this is a further description of Ezra as he's laying there on the ground and what happens. So Ezra's laying there, he's praying, he's weeping, he's making confession, and then a large crowd of people kind of gather around him. And maybe there's some different people in that crowd. Maybe there's some people that are just kind of curious, what's going on over there. You ever done that? Seen something odd? Kind of curious? Just want to go over and see what it is. Don't really want to get involved in it. Just want to see what it is and move on, right? There's all kinds of things like that. We could, maybe somebody's performing something, outside of an area you're on vacation. They're juggling. We'll see what's that crowd about. Oh, he's juggling. So maybe some people just kind of curious. Ezra's over there pulling his hair out. Go check that out. Also, you probably got people that are sympathetic towards Ezra, right? You ever see somebody that's hurting? Just want to comfort them, right? It's going to be all right. But I think you also have some other people that go over there and they recognize what's going on and they join in making the confession, right? You're right, Ezra. We have sinned, and it's your responsibility to do something about it. Get up and act, and we're going to help you. So Ezra out of those people, we see, the point I want to make is some people call it action, and they're willing to participate in the action. And that's the way we should be. We shouldn't just be sympathetic. It's going to be all right. But if there needs to be a correction, and there's times whenever there's nothing you can do. I'm talking about sin here. You need to help people make action, make a change. And so this one guy is kind of called out here. His name is Shechaniah. That's one of the names that I can actually pronounce for some reason. I don't know why. So he comes forward. He kind of takes the lead in acknowledging that they've been wrong. And he also, if you go back and look at this list of people at the end, somebody thinks he may have been involved in that, or maybe his father was, but I can't say for sure. But anyway, he is one of the leaders in suggesting that they have sinned and then to move on. He makes this suggestion that they make a covenant with God, that they all put their wives away and divorce them, and that way they can make a new covenant with God. So he proposes that the children of Israel repent and flee this sin that they've done. Also, he talks about the people that trembled at God's plan. And so there's this plea for fear and trembling at God's plan. And I think this is the idea that, I guess, a lot of people in the world that you talk to, this is, I don't want a God that I'm afraid of or fear and trembling. I want a God that gives me comfort. And we see both of those attributes of God in the scripture, don't we? I mean, we can look at passages where, it talks about we can get comfort from the fact that when our loved ones that are faithful to God have gone to be with him, right? Can we get comfort that we know that God is protecting our soul? That's so we can get that comfort. But where does the fear and trembling come in? Why were these people fearful and trembling? All right, their responsibility. And they had broken that responsibility. They had sinned. And I think that's where the fear comes in, the fear and trembling. Now, we're to be afraid and fearful of God because we have sinned. But we also know we have that comfort and the promise through Christ. And so I don't see that, in my opinion, I can't separate those two attributes from God, both the being fearful of him and the comfort, because I think they both come with great power, right? If you think about something as powerful about, electricity, electricity is very powerful and and gives us a lot of great comfort, right? I mean, apparently the air conditioner is working better today, and so we're more comfortable in here. But I tell you what, I'm not going to do. I'm not going to lick my fingers and stick it in the socket over here. I would be fearful of that. And so we see that. I don't know if it's a good comparison or not, but we can take great comfort in God. We also need to be fearful that if we are not following him, that comfort is gone and it's going to be worse for us. Any thoughts or comments on those first four, Brett? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Just say there's good parallel.
Yeah, very good. Brett gives a better example than my electric one, actually, about a good earthly, a father that's being a Christian. As a child, you're going to be fearful that if you disobey, you're going to receive some type of punishment. But also know that that father loves you and is going to comfort you the way that God is going to comfort and protect you. All right, very good example. Thank you, Brett. All right, let's look at, what time is it? We've got 4 minutes, so we'll look at verses 5 through 8. It says, then Ezra rose and made the leading priests, the Levites, and all Israel take an oath that they would do according to this proposal. So they took the oath. Then Ezra rose from before the house of God and went to the chamber of Jehoiakim, the son of Eliashib. Although he went there, he did not eat bread nor drink water, for he was mourning over the unfaithfulness of the exiles. And they made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all the exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem. And whoever would not come within 3 days, according to counsel of the leaders and the elders, all his possessions should be forfeited, and he himself excluded from the assembly of the exiles. And so he gets the leaders to make an oath to put their wives away. And so that's a pretty big accomplishment, right? So he's like, if this is going to work, you all are going to have to participate, right? And so he gets them to commit, and then he gets up and he goes back to the chamber of this fella, however you say his name, and he fasted. He didn't eat till the morning. Then they called for this assembly in 3 days. And who was called to the assembly? Everybody that's married a foreign wife has to come to the assembly. Is that what it says? It says all the exiles. So who would that include? Everybody, right? And it says you have 3 days to get here and to present yourself in this assembly. And if you don't come, we're going to fine you $50. Is that what it says? Or 2 denarii. I'm not used the proper. I don't know if I use a denarii at this point in time, but they're going to take you're going to be cut off. All your possessions, you can't even come in the assembly anymore. So it's pretty serious, right? If the governor made a proclamation, everybody has to come to Frankfurt on Tuesday in 3 days, or we're going to take everything you got, you think there would be a traffic jam on 127. Yeah, we're going, right? And so I think we can see that the children of Israel recognize that this is serious. And so they're all going to go there. So that's where we're going to leave them. We're going to leave them all assembled there in Jerusalem. All right, thank everybody for their participation. And we'll start back there on next Sunday.